Hey! Right, we've had a funny mix of weather these last few days. Warm spring sunshine one day, snowing the next, and then on the day that I filmed this video, it was blowing a gale. I suppose what I'm trying to say is, please excuse some of the camera work in this video, the wind was blowing me all over the place. Now, the Royal Enfield Super Meteor 650 finally arrived on Monday. I'm not entirely sure how long I've got it for. Royal Enfield told me a week or so I know I've got it for a week, but I'm not sure how long or so is. Now, while I was sort of trying to work out the itinerary for filming, etc. for this bike, I thought back to those days before I was running this channel when, you know, I was after a new bike and you want to know absolutely everything there is to know about it. Not so much the kind of stuff that you find in a brochure or on the online website, but what you really want is to touch the bike, feel it and taste it. I'm hoping, weather permitting, to get the actual review video out back end of this week on Friday. But I thought what might be helpful in the first instance is to do like a really detailed walk around. A close look at all the most sort of important details and components on the bike. Things you don't normally get the time to do in a review. Not properly anyway. And just give you my opinion on and thoughts on sort of, you know, how the bike sort of looks close up and what I think to the build quality. A detailed look at the bike in the metal, and it's heavy metal. In fact, this bike is a bit of a behemoth. It's built like a tank, and I mean that in a good way. Let's work our way around it and have a proper look. There's no doubt about it, this tank-like bike is a very heavy bike. If I remember correctly, 241 kilograms stated curbside weight. Now, there's a very good reason for this. There's a lot of metal on this bike and a distinct lack of plastic. Both side panels are made from painted steel. The mudguards, both front and rear, are painted steel. And it's actually quite substantial steel, not thin tinny stuff. Now, most motorcycle manufacturers would use plastic for these sort of components. And indeed, Royal Enfield have done the same with bikes like the Hunter, the Interceptor 650 and the Continental GT. But I do have my own thoughts on why perhaps Royal Enfield have gone down this route with the Super Meteor 650, which I will share with you in a few minutes. Now, obviously, these components alone are going to add a few kilograms to the weight of this bike, but it goes further than that. The forward control footrest position has also added quite a lot of heavy steel bracketry into the mix, adding to the weight, and it just goes on and on. In order to accommodate those customers that want tubeless tyres, Royal Enfield, obviously to save costs, have had to go with alloy wheels, which again are going to add some weight to this bike compared to, you know, steel rim spokes. The protectors for the upside down forks appear to be die-cast aluminium. Actually, the jury's out about that. At one point I thought they were plastic, then I thought they were aluminium. I'm undecided on that one, but I'm leaning towards precision die-cast alloy. The oil cooler guard is now a rather substantial, again, precision die-cast alloy, as opposed to the thin, lightweight sheet steel items that we see on the Continental GT and the Interceptor. Royal Enfield's usual lightweight plastic switchgear has now been replaced with some very substantial premium cast alloy items, which again will add weight to this motorcycle. Even the mirrors have much more substantial all-metal stems, with only the actual mirror dish apparently being plastic. Now, there are other components as well that I thought were probably more substantial and made from heavier materials than there was really any need for them to be. And people are always very quick to criticise the weight of a motorcycle without thinking as to why the manufacturer has added that weight. Because this didn't happen by accident. Now, what the sum of these parts and the added weight add up to is a bike that feels very substantial, reassuringly heavy and robust rather than overweight. When you sit on this bike, it feels like a two-wheeled tank, sort of relentless and unstoppable. These metal parts give the bike an air of quality and substance that you simply can't achieve with plastic parts. And I think that's exactly what Royal Enfield are aiming for with this bike. It's now the premium bike in their range. And I have to say, this build quality and the materials chosen make it feel premium. On paper, the Super Meteor may seem heavier or a similar weight to something like a BMW GS 1250, a bike renowned for being a bit unwieldy when you're trying to manhandle it, top heavy and awkward. The Super Meteor doesn't feel anything like that. Yeah, it's a little bit heavier than the likes of the Interceptor, and you can feel that weight when you're pushing the bike around. But unlike the BMW, the Super Meteor has a low centre of gravity, which makes it a much easier bike to move around in your garage. Don't discount this bike on the grounds of weight until you've actually physically tried one out for yourself. As I've said many times in the past, statistics and numbers on a piece of paper are very rarely the full story. As you know, I'm not a fan of cruiser-style motorcycles, but there is something alluring about the Super Meteor. Although it is clearly aimed at the cruiser market, it has its own style. It's not just another Harley-Davidson-esque cliche. The paintwork on all the metalwork is flawless, with only the merest hint of orange peel sort of visible in some areas. Acceptable in my opinion at this price point. Now obviously having all this metalwork on the bike does come at a slight cost. Side of these mudguards are going to be prone to stone chipping, and the insides of the side panels are going to suffer a lot from condensation, especially in countries like the UK. Now, I've got to say before I go any further, Royal Enfield have really surprised me with their corrosion resistance, with the Royal Enfield models that I already own. I've had the Interceptor 650 since 2019, and there's not a spot of rust on it anywhere. But inevitably, corrosion will become an issue long term with these sort of components. So my advice to any prospective or new owner of one of these motorcycles is treat all the insides of these components with rust inhibiting wax. I've found Bilthamber's clear wax oil to be extremely good for these sort of applications, and it's really clean and easy to use. It's cheap and effective, and it will probably increase the lifespan of these sort of components by about a decade. The premium shower upside down front forks were a bit of a surprise for me, and I'll let you know how they feel on the road test. These are balanced out with some fairly standard looking telescopic twin shocks at the rear, which I believe are an oil emulsion type. The wide spacing on the springs suggests that these are quite stiff springs, but then that will be needed because of the heavier weight of the bike. And it appears to be a linear spring rate rather than progressive. I did note that the shock attachment system is more sort of bullet-esque than the post system used on the Interceptor and the Continental GT. But this is exactly the same setup that we see on the Meteor 350, so I presume Royal Enfield have done this to retain some family traits between the two models. B-brake twin pot calipers, front and rear on a single disc, take care of the braking. I believe these are the same units used on the Interceptor and the Continental GT. I've found them to be very good. It will be interesting though to see how these handle the additional weight of the Super Meteor. So, next up, lighting, instrumentation and switchgear. The Super Meteor features a full LED equipped headlamp, A thoughtful feature is that when you switch on the ignition, only the positioning lamp illuminates, which obviously is a very low output, low draw light. Now, the main headlamp does not come on until you've started up the engine. This is to prevent excessive draw on the battery, which would otherwise long term weaken the battery. A nice, thoughtful feature. I like that. The LEDs illuminate with a nice bright white light, which I like. This bike I don't think is intended to be a modern classic, so the whole headlamp assembly, a modern look, suits the bike very well, I think. It appears that the headlamp assembly is a plastic bowl with, once again, a die-cast alloy bezel. The indicators are of a plastic construction, but very neat and tidy, high quality plastic, pretty much what you would expect to see on any premium bike really. I do like the design of the tail light, which in many ways is very similar to the headlamp. And the indicator system does feature a hazard warning function, which is accessed via the switchgear on the right hand side of the handlebar. I did find the icons on the button a little bit difficult to see, but I suppose once you know they're there, you know they're there. And the rotary switch operates the engine kill switch and, of course, the starter. On the left-hand side, you have control for the headlamp, your main beam and your pass light, and a fairly standard indicator control switch, the button for the horn. At the front of that switchgear assembly, you also have the information button, which really is just a toggle between your odometer and your A and B trip meters. Now, I'm a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to instrument pods on motorcycles. You know, I like the separate speedometer and rev counter. But actually, this is quite minimalist on the Super Meteor. It's very similar to that used on the Meteor 350 and the Hunter 350, and I quite like it. The information displayed on the central LCD panel comprises of a fuel gauge, an econometer that tells you whether you're riding your bike fuel efficiently or riding it like an idiot. Now, I did find that until you've got the bike running, or certainly for the first few hundred miles, these things are a little bit hit and miss. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the eco icon displaying and going off, but once the engine's got a few miles on it, it becomes quite useful. You also have a clock, a gear position indicator, and the previously mentioned odometer and A and B trip. On the right hand side of this, you have the ubiquitous Royal Enfield Bluetooth navigation aid known as the Tripper. I tried this out on the Hunter and I couldn't get it to work properly. It kept freezing up, yet other people have told me that these work very well, so I'm not going to badmouth it. I didn't have a lot of time to play with it on the Hunter. Hopefully I'll be more successful with the upcoming review on this bike. The front brake and clutch lever are adjustable by a curious little plastic knob on the front of the levers. There is a bit of a knack to get these to work properly. You have to sort of take the slack up by pushing the lever out slightly. There's a bit of an art to it, but that doesn't really matter because for most riders you'll set these and then you'll forget all about them. You won't need to touch them again. The point is they do have some adjustability as standard, which is good. The frame is finished in a sort of semi-satin metallic graphite or gunmetal grey. I'm not a welder, but the welds look okay to me. Not the best that I've seen, but by no means the worst. Certainly commensurate with the price of the bike, I would say. The rocker box cover, the clutch cover and the magneto cover along with the front sprocket guard are all finished in the same sort of graphite or gunmetal grey. And I noticed that the front sprocket guard has been redesigned for the Super Meteor. It's a different configuration to the Continental GT and the Interceptor. I'll give a report on the seat when I actually ride the bike. Let's just talk about one or two things that bother me a little bit. First of all, the cooling fins on the cylinder head. On the Meteor 350, these have been ground back, which gives the engine a real premium look in my eyes. Now, when Royal Enfield first announced the 650 air oil cooled twin, the example that the first showed the same type of finishing. It was absent on the Interceptor and the Continental GT, but I hoped that they would incorporate it on this bike. Unfortunately, they haven't. I think this is now their flagship model, and I would have liked to have seen that sort of finishing on the cylinder. Also, the Royal Enfield logo on the clutch cover, I don't like it. Maybe it's just me, but I feel it cheapens the look of the bike. I much prefer the original that we have on the Interceptor and the Continental. Then there's the positioning of the master cylinder and reservoir for the rear brake. Now, I know why they've done this. It's because of the foot peg position. And I'm sure that they did actually look for other ways of doing it, but decided this was the only way they could do it. I don't like it. It looks awkward and out of place. It spoils the look of the engine, and it's going to make cleaning of this casing an absolute nightmare. Now, it did strike me initially that this equipment was going to be particularly vulnerable in the case of the bike even falling over on its right hand side. But as I said at the beginning of this video, this bike is sort of built like a tank, and accordingly they've placed a very chunky piece of armour plating over it. So I'm sure Royal Enfield have thought that through, and they've taken the necessary precautions here, so that's probably nothing to worry about. Now, just before I finish off, there are a couple of things that I've actually forgotten. The exhaust system, they have made a splendid job of these pipes. It's no secret that the silencers on the Continental GT and the Interceptor were a bit clumsy, but on the Super Meteor, they've slimmed and miniaturised them splendidly. I think it looks absolutely cock-on with the style of the bike. I can't fault what they've done here. The barrel hand grips with the Royal Enfield detailing, really nice touch. They look really premium. And they've also made a really good job of all the foot peg rubbers. Again, all high quality stuff. Can't fault any of it. The fuel filler cap, again, is a nice piece of kit. It looks and feels premium. And once again, it's really hard to tell, but I'm pretty sure that these are precision die-cast alloy. Paint finishing around the filler neck is good. It's always a difficult area to paint on any motorcycle, but they've done a reasonable job of that. I'm happy with it. It remains to be seen how accurate they are, but, you know, these are the best that I've seen in the industry. Really clearly marked out markers for chain adjustment. Big bold numerals and markers, easy to read. Exactly what you need for accurate adjustment of your chain. Just one more thing to mention and then I'll let you go. Now, I love motorcycle toolkits. There's not many motorcycle manufacturers include proper toolkits anymore. In the case of the Super Meteor, it's secreted behind the left-hand side panel, which opens via a lock. And this is where you'll also find your USB port for charging your phone or whatever. One thing you do need to be careful of, and I've noticed this on the classic models, is that if you're not careful, your nice glossy paintwork does come in contact with the rear foot peg hanger if you're not careful, which is going to mar it over time. So a bit of advice: if you buy one of these bikes or you're viewing this in the future and you're an owner, put something like your glove or your hand or a little rag or something between the two, just to make sure you don't have any mishaps. The toolkit itself is pretty comprehensive. You can carry out most sort of home maintenance tasks without having to resort to another toolkit, I think as it stands now, Royal Enfield supply the best motorcycle toolkits on the market. Probably on par with the old BMW kits from yesteryear. But having said that, it's a Royal Enfield, so you're not really going to need them. Now, the only issue with these toolkits is they all come, each tool, individually wrapped in sort of tissue paper, or most of them anyway. And it felt a bit naughty unwrapping them to show you because it's not my bike, so yeah, I didn't bother. Great little toolkit. It's a very rare thing to get these days. And I'm glad Royal Enfield have kept up the tradition. Right, so that's a sort of detailed overview or walk around of the Royal Enfield Super Meteor 650. I think I've covered most relevant things. If there's anything that you think I might have missed, leave a comment in the comment section, and if there's enough people mention it, I'll try to accommodate it in the proper review of the bike. There's no such thing as a perfect motorcycle, and you know, as much as this is a premium offering from Royal Enfield, and I think they've really hit the mark with it. Obviously, there are one or two little niggles that I've mentioned. I know some people think that I'm a Royal Enfield sycophant and I never have a bad word to say for them. I'm sorry some people feel that way, but certainly the way I've always operated is I will praise where praise is due, but if something's not right, I will call them out on it. And to be honest, I think it's quite obvious that Royal Enfield is the kind of company that responds well to that sort of input. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber, and if you do subscribe, ensure that you hit the notification bell and ensure that your notifications are enabled in your channel settings. That way, hopefully, YouTube will inform you whenever I upload a new video, including the upcoming review of this motorcycle. I am, of course, going to be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.